Now, I don't want to come across like a snake oil salesman. Do you guys know what I mean when I say snake oil salesman? They're, people who would like go from town to town and selling some kind of liquid that, you put this on any malady and it'll cure everything. It makes everything better. I don't want to come across like that, but I have found a product that makes everything better. It's called Montreal Steak Spice. It goes on everything. I actually put this in my hamburgers. That's the key. If you guys are homemade burger makers, try it. You will not regret it. I put it on steak, obviously, pork chops, chicken. There's nothing that can't go without this. I mixed it in with some other flavors too, so it's not only this. But if we have company, we actually have like a bigger size. That's like the real size one. But I just got to whiff it. It smells really good. Montreal Steak Spice makes everything better. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if we had a product like that for your life? Like, no matter what's going on in your life, if you got, work problems, just a little sprinkle of this miracle product, it would make it better. Marriage issues, relationships with your kids, health, if you got a broken down jalopy, just put a little bit in the gas tank and everything's all better. It would be so good, wouldn't it? Just a little dash, instantly everything's better. So much of our lives is about trying to be better. Kathy and I and our girls watched a movie last night called Ford versus Ferrari. Anyone seen this? It was pretty good, actually. I enjoyed it. It's Matt Damon and Christian Bale, and they're telling the true story, at least based on a true story, of the time that Ford went head to head against Ferrari in Le Mans in the '60s. And I won't spoil it for you and tell you how it all turned out, but it was actually really good movie. But there's a couple of scenes where it's like the guy just set the record, the track record for the fastest time around the lap. And he says to himself, but I can make it a little bit faster. I can just be a little bit better. We've made the fastest car ever. Let's strip out some stuff and make it a little bit lighter because we can go faster. We just want to always push the envelope a little bit more, go a little bit faster, a little bit faster. And it also made me think of the Olympics. People will train for years to shave off, like a tenth of a second. And that's really the difference between, first place and third place. But it's just this constant pressure to try and do a little better, a little better, a little better. It's why the self-help section is so big in your library. George Carlin tells a joke. He says, I went to the library or to the bookstore and asked for the self-help section, asked where it was, and the person there said, I could tell you, but it would defeat the purpose. Thanks. There's just this part of us that just wants to be a little bit better, a little bit better. And I think this mentality works its way into our faith. We just want to be better. We want to just work a little harder. It's the idea that Jesus helps you to act better. Behavior modification. Like we're all bad and he just helps us to be good. Today's big idea is a quote actually from a guy named Leonard Ravenhill. He's a Christian author. It said, Jesus did not come into the world to make bad men good. He came into the world to make dead men alive. Jesus did not come into the world to make bad men good, but to make dead men alive. And I'm going to paraphrase and say that applies to women as well. We are in a series called Other Women, stories of lesser-known women in the Bible. There are over 400 women who are referred to in the Bible. A lot of them we know their names. Some of them we never get to know their names. They're just referred to as a woman. Today's woman is borderline. If this is your first time here, we've been doing this series for a little while, and I keep saying, we tend to focus on certain women. We tell the story of Mary a lot around Christmas time. We talk about other women who are prominent in the Bible. But what can we learn from these women who we barely know anything about? And today, again, is kind of a borderline other woman. I know I've preached on her before. I've heard other people talk about her before. But then I told someone earlier this week who we were preaching on, and that person didn't know who we were talking about. So maybe she counts. And in fact, it's actually two women. There's a good chance you may have heard of these women, even if you don't know their name, because we don't know their name. But before we get to them, we need to understand the world they lived in. Okay, these were Jewish women living at the time of Jesus, but they grew up in Jewish culture. Just to tell you a little bit about the culture, Numbers chapter 19. This is from Moses' writings, the book of the law, this is what God told Israel, this is how I want you guys to live. And God had very specific rules for them. He actually didn't have a ton of rules compared to the world we live in now, but he had very specific rules. This is the way I want you to live. Do not live the other way. And some of it doesn't make any sense to us. There's some laws that we look at and be like, I have no idea where that came from, other than just that God said don't do that. And so some of it might have been, I don't want you to be like the people who are around you. I want you to be different. Some of these made more sense in the moment too. Like this one. It says, all those who touch a dead human body will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves on the third and seventh day with waters of purification. Then they will be purified. But if they do not do this on the third and seventh days, they will continue to be unclean even after the seventh day. All those who touch a dead body and do not purify themselves in the proper way defile the Lord's tabernacle, and they will be cut off from the community of Israel. Since the water of purification was not sprinkled on them, their defilement continues. And so you've got, basically what we're talking about here is quarantine and hygiene, right? Like if you touch a dead body, you need to go aside and be quarantined for a little bit, and you also need to cleanse yourself, because it was a very practical thing. You could spread that to other people, but God doesn't make it just about physical. He also makes it spiritual. If you've touched this, not only are you physically unclean, you're also spiritually unclean for the time being. So if you want to worship God, and for a nation that was supposed to make God the most important thing, that was really important, then you have to cleanse yourself, or be cleansed, to come and worship God again. Another section, Leviticus chapter 15. Again, more of the laws. Any man who has a bodily discharge is ceremonially unclean. He's unclean. Anything he touches is unclean. This I'm paraphrasing here. Anyone he touches is unclean. Anyone who touches anything he touched is unclean. If he spits on someone, they're unclean. It's like God wants us to understand this is really important, right? There are certain things that if it happens to you, not only are you unclean, but anything you touch, if you lay on a bed, that bed's unclean. If someone else comes and touches that bed, they're unclean. It's like the ultimate version of cooties, right? Like from when you were a kid, someone's got cooties, you touch them, now you have cooties. Probably a really cruel practice, but that's the way we were. The general principle for all of this is that when the unclean comes into contact with the clean, it is the clean that is made unclean. Does that make sense? All right. If I'm unclean and I touch something, that thing becomes unclean as well. If someone else touches it, they become unclean. It just spreads like that. Continue on again. Chapter 15, verse 19 and verse 25. Whenever a woman has her menstrual period, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. This makes sense a little bit later on. Anyone who touches her during that time will be unclean until evening. If a woman has a flow of blood for many days that is unrelated to her menstrual period, or if the blood continues beyond the normal period, she is ceremonially unclean. As during her menstrual period, the woman will be unclean as long as the discharge continues. You probably didn't expect that coming in church this morning, did you? I maybe should have had a warning up or something like that. First of all, I need you to know this no longer applies. John 15:3, Jesus said, "You are already clean because of the word I've spoken into you." All right, there are certain laws that we follow from the Old Testament, and certain ones that God basically says they no longer apply to you. Okay, and that's a whole different topic. All that to say, blood was something that God said made you unclean. And the same kind of thing, right? If I touch something, it becomes unclean, not the other way around. So that is the world that this story takes place in. All right? I mean, it's a long time later, but it's still the world they live in. It's the Jewish culture. These were their laws. And Jesus has just done some miraculous things across a lake. He gets into a boat, starting Mark chapter 5, verse 21. It says, Jesus got into the boat again and went back to the other side of the lake, where a large crowd gathered around him on the shore. Now, most people think that this took place in Capernaum. Capernaum was a place where Jesus had been before and had done all kinds of incredible miracles. I mean, everywhere he went, he just healed people, right? People would come up to him and he would heal them. People were sick, Jesus touched them, made them better. And so he got to have a bit of a reputation in this town. It was kind of like his home away from home in some ways. And so he goes back to this place. It says, then a leader of the local synagogue, who, by the way, religious leaders didn't usually appreciate Jesus very much. But this man's desperate. His name is Jairus. and he arrived. And when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. I mean, that's unusual. If you read through the Gospels, to have a religious leader fall at Jesus' feet is unusual. Most religious leaders, when they see Jesus, they point the finger. They start to judge. They start to try to trap him. They treat him poorly. But here, Jairus falls at his feet. And that's a sign of humility. That's an incredible humbleness, especially in that culture. Pleading fervently with him. Here's the reason. He says, "My little daughter is dying." He said, "Come, please lay your hands on her. Heal her so that she can live." This shows incredible faith. I mean, this is a man who has heard what Jesus has done. He knows it might cost him because, other religious leaders didn't appreciate Jesus this way. But he doesn't care. He is willing to humble himself. He's willing to come before Jesus, kneel down, and have the faith that says, if you come and touch her, she will be healed. Now, it's interesting that he's got incredible faith, but it's not ultimate faith. There's another story later on in Scripture where a Roman soldier says to Jesus, says, "You don't need to come. I know that you've got the power, so just say it, and it'll happen." Which is even more faith. But here we have at least a little bit of faith, and Jesus is willing to work with a little bit of faith. So Jesus went with him, and all the people followed, crowding around him. Now, Jairus refers to his little daughter, but we actually find out she's actually 12 years old. As he walks along, the people followed, crowding around Jesus. The word there actually is similar to like suffocating. This is a crowd that is like just completely wrapped around him. Everyone is it's like a mosh pit. And Jesus is in the middle of it. And everyone's just trying to get close to him, just walk beside him. A woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. So remember the culture they live in? This is the reason why I was talking about those verses. This is a woman who has been unclean for 12 years. What does that mean? What does that mean for her? This isn't like, I can just imagine today how miserable that would be. And then multiply that by the fact that she is an outcast in society. Anywhere she goes, anything she touches, it becomes unclean. I mean, if you knew this about this woman, you would see her, you would step away. Because I don't want that to get in the way of what I want to go do. Let's say I'm on my way to go to church, and this woman comes by. If she touches me, I can't go to church. I can't go to work. I can't do anything until I've gone through the process of purifying myself. And this woman is not able to purify herself because she never stops bleeding. Just imagine what that would be like. Imagine the loneliness. If she had a husband, this would have been grounds in that culture for divorce. It is very likely that she is all by herself. She is all alone, lonely, desperate. And it's even worse than that. Verse 26, she had suffered a great deal from many doctors. Interesting there. It doesn't say that she had suffered from this illness. She suffered from the doctors. And over the years, she had spent everything she had to pay them. But she had gotten no better. In fact, she had gotten worse. It doesn't say very much about the doctors there, does it? I mean, you could imagine the first doctor, maybe even the second, maybe even the third, trying their best. But at some point, you would just think to yourself, stop taking her money. Start caring for the person. Even if you can't help her, tell her so that she doesn't waste her money on you. But this is a desperate woman. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Now, why did she think that? The text doesn't tell us this, but if we know a little bit about the history of Israel, we understand what her mind is here. She looks at Jesus and she believes that he is the Messiah. See, Jesus was a God-fearing Jew. He lived in the Jewish culture. He did everything a Jewish person was supposed to do. So he wore what we sometimes refer to as a prayer shawl. A prayer shawl. It was like this little kind of mini blanket that he would wear, and every Jewish man who followed God's word would wear one. And at the bottom of the shawl were these little tassels that would hang off the bottom. And they would sort of refer to them as their wings. Like, you imagine you're wearing a shawl, you can sort of get where they get the idea of wings from. And so they got these little tassels with wings on the bottom. And there's a verse in Malachi referring to the Messiah. It says, "But for you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness, the Messiah, will rise with healing in his wings." And so this woman looks at Jesus and she believes that he is the Messiah, and she sees his wings and she thinks, if I just touch his wings, I'll be healed. This is a woman who is desperate, who is lonely, who knows she's not even supposed to be in the crowd. Right? She doesn't belong there. If anyone else knew that she was there, they'd probably be upset with her. And she's kind of sneaking in undercover. I mean, this picture where she's just, down on the ground trying to grab at his robe. Immediately, the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. I don't know what that experience was like for her. I've talked before about a miraculous healing I've had, where in the moment, I had jaw pain. I just, something wasn't right with my jaw. Someone prayed for me. In the moment, I felt the pain go away. And so, I imagine it's something similar with her. Whatever was causing her hemorrhaging or her bleeding, in that moment where she touches his wings, she's healed. And this part is so interesting. Nowhere else in Scripture does it refer to this kind of power going out. I mean, I don't know if I've ever spoken to anybody who's had any kind of healing ministry talk about power that they feel. But Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him. Now, I don't know if that was the case all the time for him. If it was, you can imagine how exhausted he would be after a day of healing everybody. Again, we never hear about this from anywhere else in Scripture, but at this moment, Jesus knew that healing power had gone out from him. So he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" Now again, remember the suffocating crowd that is around him. Everyone, it's the mosh pit, right? Everyone is touching him. And Jesus stops and says, "Who just touched me?" You might start to think, what are you talking about? Everyone is touching you. His disciples said that to him. He said, "Look at this crowd pressing around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But there was something significant about this touch. There was other people who just wanted to be around him, just wanted to touch him, but this woman was desperately needing to touch him. There's a difference between knowing about somebody and knowing them. There's a difference between knowing about Jesus and knowing him. Let me say it a different way. There's a difference between attendance at church and salvation. You could come to church for years and bump into Jesus every week and not be saved. There's something significant that happens when you give your life to Jesus, when you bow down, when you humble yourself, when you reach out and touch him with a desperate need that says, I'm not enough on my own. There's a part of you that says, I know that I need to be saved and I can't save myself. That's the kind of touch that Jesus is talking about. And his disciples don't get it, and nobody else in the crowd gets it, but he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Now, in the moment you have to ask yourself, does Jesus really not know? I mean, he felt this power go out of him. We know that he's got, incredible, God power, and it gets kind of confusing when you ask yourself, how much of that did he put on hold? How much does he know? But he kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. Now, is this cruel of Jesus? I mean, this is a woman who knows that, she probably shouldn't be there. She probably should have told people that she was coming, that she's unclean. She's touching all these other people as part of the crowd. And is Jesus really just calling her out to embarrass her? Like, why couldn't he have just let it happen? Even if he didn't know, as soon as he recognized who it was, and knew what happened, Why did he not just let it go at that point? Why did he have to call her out publicly? And I think it's for a very specific reason. See, I believe that Jesus knew exactly what had happened. I believe that he knew in the moment that he healed someone, and that he knew who he had healed, and that he knew what this woman had gone through for 12 years. And I believe he did this on purpose, not to humiliate her, but to lift her up. To help everyone around realize that this woman was unclean and now she's clean. See, there's nothing cruel about Jesus ever. And so when we see a story like this, we have to understand he must have had a different mindset. He must have been doing this not for his own sake, but for her sake, and maybe for those around, to say that this woman is now ready to be a part of your society again. No one can ever look down on her again, because whatever was wrong with her is gone. She was unclean, but she is now clean. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, your suffering is over." And isn't that a wonderful story? But it's not over yet, is it? Because where are they on their way to? They're on their way to Jairus' daughter, who is dying. And Jesus says to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." And now put yourself, I know this is other women we're talking about, but for the moment, put yourself in Jairus' shoes, sandals. As soon as Jesus said, maybe he's thinking, wow, this is exciting. Jesus has the power to heal people. But do you think the synagogue leader might have known a little bit about this woman? Do you think the synagogue leader would have understood the law of Moses? And as soon as he said, "Daughter," do you not think that he would have thought of his own daughter? See, I think Jairus would have connected the dots and said, this woman was unclean, and now the healer has touched her, which according to the rules makes him unclean, which means he is now defiled and cannot come and heal my daughter. And my daughter is desperately sick, on the point of death. So much so that I'm willing to humble myself before this man that everyone else, every other religious leader looks down on. Jesus says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." And I think he did that on purpose so that Jairus would hear it as well. See, he wanted Jairus to understand that there's a difference between him and everyone else. Anyone else touches this woman, they become unclean according to God's laws. But Jesus is different. Jesus, when he touches something unclean, he makes that thing clean, not the other way around. Anyone else, they touch something unclean, they become unclean. But Jesus is different. When he touches something unclean or someone unclean, he doesn't change, they do. And when you reach out and touch Jesus in a way that's different than bumping into him, but ask him for salvation, you are the one who is made clean, not the other way around. And while he was still speaking to her, messengers arrived from the home of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. They told him, "Your daughter is dead. There's no use troubling the teacher now." Again, imagine what that is like. Imagine as a father hearing those words. I know some of you have probably heard those words. I know people in our church have heard those words anyway. I can imagine it's probably about the worst thing you can hear. And so Jairus in the moment is, putting two and two together, thinking Jesus is now defiled. He can't even come and heal her. Now I've just been told she's dead. There's not even any point in going. There's no use troubling the teacher now. But Jesus overheard them and said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just have faith." Which I think is an interesting wording. I know this is a translation from the original language, but to me that's an interesting way of saying it. Don't be afraid, just have faith. It's a way of saying you can't partner faith with fear. Don't be afraid, just have faith. Because maybe up to now, Jairus had been somebody who had a little bit of faith and a lot of fear. And Jesus is saying, you got to leave that fear behind. Just have faith. You don't need to fear anymore. When Jesus comes in your life, you don't need to fear. You just need to have faith. Then Jesus stopped the crowd and wouldn't let anyone go with him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw much commotion and weeping and wailing. He went inside and asked, Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep. In that culture, the more important you were, the more people you had to have at your funeral. It was the way they had it. And they would actually hire professional mourners. And I found out that this is still a thing. There are people that you can hire to come. I mean, I've seen jokes about this. You give me $100, I'll come and cry at your funeral. You give me $500, I'll wail and throw myself in the casket, stuff like that. But there are actually people who offer this service. That if you pay them, they will show up at a funeral and they'll wail and cry depending on how much you paid them. It seems crazy to me, but this was actually common practice back in the day. And Jairus, being an important person and probably a wealthy person, would have had a lot of people there. But Jesus isn't having any of it. Why all this commotion and weeping? The child isn't dead. She's only asleep. Now, he knows that she's dead. He's just wanting them to understand that this is different than usual, okay? And the crowd laughed at him. And other translations make that actually more obvious, that they jeered him, and they kept on jeering at him. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're an idiot. You're a moron. But he made them all leave. He took the girl's father and mother and his 3 disciples into the room where the girl was lying. Holding her hand, he said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, get up. Which is something, as a father of teenage girls, I've had to say a few times. Talitha cum, little girl, get up. Imagine being there, either the disciples or the parent, and this girl is dead. And he's just saying, just get up. There is nothing that is impossible with Jesus. And the girl, who was 12 years old, immediately stood up and walked around. They were overwhelmed and totally amazed. Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anyone what had happened. And then he told them to give her something to eat. I mean, he just gets right to the practical. She's hungry, give her something to eat, That she's not just a little bit better. She's alive. She needs something to eat. This isn't like a temporary thing. She's not going to die again in the next few minutes. This isn't like a momentary resuscitation. She's alive. Get on with your life. Now, there's interesting differences here. You got this little girl who lived for 12 years and then was dying, and you've got this woman who had suffered for 12 years and is now healed. You've got Jairus, who comes. He's known to everybody, right? He comes and publicly says, I want you to come heal my daughter. You've got the bleeding woman who comes to him, privately, unknown, in secret, doesn't want anyone to know that she's there. You've got Jairus, who's probably quite wealthy. You've got this woman who is poor because she's given all her money to the doctors. You've got a very public healing. Jesus, not only says, I healed someone, he points her out and he says, I want everyone else to see this is what I have done, which again is unusual for Jesus at this time. A little while later, Jesus makes himself publicly known when he comes in the triumphal entry. But at this time, he's saying, it's not yet my time to be known. And yet he takes the time right here to publicly let people know that he healed this woman. With a little girl, it's very private. Everyone get out, just a few people as witnesses. I think the thing here is that the needs of each woman were drastically different. Woman, 12-year-old girl, her needs were very different from the bleeding woman. Jesus responds to them differently, but he gives them exactly what they need. And you might be coming to Jesus this morning with a certain need, and it might be different than someone else's. And Jesus will meet you where you are, and he will give you exactly what you need. But what I think we need most today is to identify with both women. Everyone has to come to that conclusion, and even us guys, okay? I know that sometimes it's a bit... I was actually, as I was getting into the series, I was like, how are the men going to handle this series? Other women, entire summer of just talking about women. as opposed to most of the year when we mostly talk about men. So if you have an issue with that, suck it up. We all need to identify with both women, or at least their condition. It is true that every one of us comes to Jesus unclean. We need his touch to make us clean. But our situation is really more like Jairus' daughter. We're not just dirty, needing to be washed. We're not just bad, needing to be better. We are dead in our sin, and we need him to make us alive. Until we recognize how hopeless our situation is without Jesus, we will forever be stuck trying to be just a little bit better. We'll be stuck trying to earn our way into heaven. But the truth is found in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. God saved you by his grace when you believed. And you can't take credit for this. It is a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. Jesus did not come into the world to make bad men good. He came into the world to make dead men alive. I'm going to ask our worship team to come up.